we'd like to begin the session. So again, thank you so much for joining this session. And I am very excited to be co-hosting this session of the International IVF Initiative with Sheila Sadruddin. Shaista is a clinical embryologist with over 7 years of experience in the field. Shaista is employed at the Atlanta Center for Reproductive Medicine, but previously worked at Reproductive Biology Associates. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and her master's degree from Eastern Virginia Medical School. Shaista is very passionate about training junior embryologists in the field and wishes to see growth and innovation take the IVF industry to new heights.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that lovely introduction. I just want to remind everybody that you can find a recording of this session along with all of our previous sessions at ivfmeeting.com. And you will also find information about upcoming sessions on that same website. Thank you so much for logging in and listening today. We encourage your questions and ask that you use the Q&A function to ask your questions. So I'd like to now introduce Anna. She's also a clinical embryologist with over 6 years of experience. She's currently employed at the London Women's Clinic in London. Anna graduated from the University of Ulster with a Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Science and a diploma in professional practice. She completed a master's in reproductive science and women's health at the University College London. During her time there, she was a founding member and key organizer of the Young Embryologists Network. Anna, it is such a pleasure to be able to host this session with you today.
Thanks, Shaista. So before we get started, we would like to announce some special treats for today's session. First, we will be hosting a very unique and special networking event after today's initial 60-minute session. Please stay tuned for the link to join the networking meeting, which we will post in the chat towards the end of this session. Only the first 100 participants will be able to attend this networking program. So if you are interested, please do try join us. Our second treat is a special giveaway for today's session. Thank you to Smart Separations, which is a new startup company, and in keeping with today's theme, it is run by young professionals using nanotechnology to produce PPE and antiviral solutions for both air and surfaces. They are kindly giving away a Geno air sanitizer, which is perfect for office space or waiting rooms. This air sanitizer will be given away today to the attendee that asks the best question in the question and answer section.
Thank you all for attending today. I know that today is a big day for the people here in the United States, as we will be determining our next president in the next coming hours. I know our nation and the rest of the world will be watching carefully as we find out what our future holds. But speaking of what our future holds, I would like to share with our audience the inspiration and reasoning behind today's session. Unlike our typical i3 sessions, this one is not content-based. Instead, we hope to have great conversations with our diverse and skilled panel on where the industry is right now, what direction it is headed in, and how young professionals, scientists, and entrepreneurs alike can best utilize and navigate the growing field of IVF and infertility. Our industry has made bounds and strides in the last millennium, but we still have a long way to go, and we need bright-minded young spirits to take us into the future.
Yeah, Shaista, I completely agree. I think this is all very true and important. Learning about our panel's careers and experiences will hopefully spark a flame within younger embryologists and professionals, and hopefully show them what all is out there for them and how they can maximize their potential. I also think that it will be truly beneficial for more seasoned professionals who work alongside or maybe manage younger people in the field, in the sense that it will help them relate to and understand the drive and ambition of young professionals. And since our industry has changed significantly in the last 20 to 30 years, it's a much different experience for an embryologist entering the field now versus what it was a few decades ago.
Exactly. Thank you, Anna. So let's get started. I want to start by introducing Tom Smith. He's an entrepreneur. He is the CEO and co-founder of Daddy. He was a member of Apple's first iPhone team. Most recently, he co-headed a product at media company Giphy. He currently resides in Brooklyn, New York. He graduated from the London College of Economics in 2009, where he received a bachelor's in managerial economics and strategy. So Tom, please tell us your story.
Thank you so much, Shaista and Anna. Privileged to be here today to speak to everybody. So my background, I was born and raised in Toronto, so I'm Canadian. As mentioned, I went to the London School of Economics for my undergrad. It was always my ambition to build things. It was always a form of a long-term interest of mine. I never actually studied anything in the medical related field. So my background is actually more in economics and game theory. But coming out of university, I was fixated on working in investment banking. So for anyone who's dropped off the call, I apologize already. But after buying the iPhone right out of college, I was blown away by the magnitude of the product. I was lucky enough to find an individual who worked on the first iPhone team, and I joined a crew of 6 people. And we were charged with expanding the iPhone across all the carriers and countries around the world. So when I joined the iPhone, it was an AT&T US and O2 UK, but no other carrier and country around the world. After a year of working for Apple in the UK, they relocated me to Cupertino, where I spent a number of additional years working in ops, at R&D, corporate retail, and then on Siri. Then after leaving Apple, after my time there, I started my first company, which was called Offline Publishing. It was a kind of a play on Apple News Plus. We weren't able to get anyone to pay for content, but that experience really taught me how to build apps. And very shortly after that, started another company called iMoji. iMoji was the first digital sticker company, a very silly business compared to what we're all talking about in our disciplines here today, but one that actually had fairly significant scale. So when we sold the business, we were serving about 5 to 6 billion stickers every month, and then sold it to a company called Giphy in New York, where I became co-head of product, helped to expand that organization, and Giphy was later purchased by Instagram. About 3.5 years ago, I started working on Daddy. The genesis of the idea came from when a friend of mine was diagnosed with cancer. And I looked and I saw the kind of male fertility journey and industry through that lens, and ultimately saw a huge opportunity to modernize that service. That's what we're doing today. We've been operating for 2 years, and I'm based in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay, wow, Tom, thank you. That's so amazing to hear about all of your successful exits and that inspirational story as to how you landed in this industry today. So we're going to start with 2 questions for you. The first one is, what are some of the most valuable mistakes that you have made in your journey?
So it's an interesting question. I mean, take it from someone who's definitely made a lot of mistakes. I think for me, the most valuable and maybe one of the largest mistakes I ever made was when I put ego and short-term gain over relationship and long-term opportunity. And what I mean specifically, it was when we were starting iMoji, and for people in the audience, if you're thinking about starting an organization, there's really a flurry of activity when you decide to start something. You have to create a cap table and adjust incentives and find roles for people. And ultimately, there was a situation where a good friend of mine had a different perspective than myself and other people on the organization. And we ultimately sided on the side of short-term interest over that relationship. And it's something that has really helped to inform a philosophy that I actually try to live by, and something that we've tried to imply or apply to the broader Daddy team. And that's the idea of long-term thinking. Long-term thinking really applies to people, and making sure that we continue to think about relationships in the long-term lens versus a short-term incentive. And it's a lesson that I've kind of tried to remind myself on a daily basis, because I'm no longer friends with that individual. And it's something that I think, I largely regret. So I would say, long-term thinking over short-term ego-driven interests.
I like that. I like that a lot. Hopefully that person is out there listening today, and your relationship will be rekindled after today.
that would be nice.
I agree. Especially in the industry of IVF, I think it's such a small niche community that burning bridges is not something that any of us can afford to do. So that's amazing. Thank you. My second question to you is, what is one thing you wish you had known 5 years ago?
Yeah, so this one's a little more practical than philosophical. There's a practice in organization called zero inbox. It's the practice where you make your email effectively a to-do list. I'm a big believer in staying organized, and that practice itself has helped me both scale my own productivity, but also be more responsive to the people in my world. There's a great book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, which helps to articulate the cognitive load associated with being disorganized. And for me, that was a big lesson and something that I think everyone should take a look at.
Tell me the name of that book again.
It's called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And the practice is called Zero Inbox.
I like that. All right. Thank you, Tom.
Of course.
Amazing, Tom. Thank you so much. I think I'll definitely have to give that book a read also. So now I would be delighted to introduce our second speaker. And our second speaker is Alex Bisignano. Alex is a scientist and technologist. He is the co-founder and CEO of Phosphorus, a company that develops technologies aimed at preventing genetic disease. Before Phosphorus, Alex co-founded Recombine, a company offering genetic testing prior to pregnancy, which was then acquired by Cooper Surgical. His work has been presented at the ASRM, ESHRA, the American Society of Human Genetics, and a number of other scientific programs. Alex has also appeared on Fox Business and Bloomberg TV. Alex received his AB in molecular biology from Princeton University and is a member of the Sigma Xi, the Scientific Research Society. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Alex.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, it's been an interesting pathway, kind of starting companies in the scientific realm. So, looking at my background, I had graduated with a molecular biology degree, and I was a bit unclear as to exactly what I wanted to do with it. And I think pre-med was sort of what popped into my head, and I was fascinated with genetics and stem cells, and had kind of started on a path of going down to I wanted to be a hematologist oncologist, actually. And in the process of doing that, right out of college, I was looking for a job and had been introduced actually to one of the organizing panelists, Dr. Jack Cohen, his partner, Santi Monet, over at Reprogenetics, which was a company that had done a lot of the innovation in reproductive genetics and pre-implantation genetic testing. And at the time of my graduation, I made the decision to start studying computer science just a little too late, but I wanted to learn how to write code, and I felt that that would serve me a bit with in the scientific community, specifically with analyzing genetic data. So over the next 2 years, I started saying yes to projects in reproductive genetics, whether it was analyzing data, looking at writing up publications, and it was a really great experience for me, practicing data analytics, writing. At the time also, I had decided I needed to also make money. So I learned how to build websites for people. And I built websites in the IVF world, in the legal world, in the recruiting world, and sort of taught myself enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be that great at it. And, in the course of the first 2 years doing this, I ended up talking to Dr. Monet, who's now my co-founder at both my companies, about starting a reproductive genetic testing company, which we finally launched in the end of 2012, called Recombine, which was my first company. So it was a bit of a random walk. I think the opportunities that presented themselves roughly were kind of a function of timing as well. I just happened to graduate college when all these new DNA microarray and sequencing technologies were just hitting the market and required a knowledge of both computer science and genetics. And it was sort of fascinating to be there for that moment.
Amazing. It sounds so interesting. And I mean, it's such an interesting story. So we have 2 questions for you also. So the first is there anything that you wish you had known 5 years ago that you kind of know now?
Oh, plenty. Yeah, I'd say, 5 years ago, I was still in the mindset of, being a doer with a lot of things. So I think it's in all of our nature to work very hard. especially in this industry. I see in IVF, in embryology, some incredible work ethic. As we're thinking about scaling up organizations, constantly trying to do yourself, whether it's fundraising, whether it's working on writing papers, whether it's writing code, becomes unscalable, right? And team building for me was an exercise in letting go, and something that I definitely didn't do graciously at first. So I'd say if I can tell myself 5 years ago to start consciously doing less, that would be a valuable lesson to have learned earlier.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. It's one of those things, yeah, you kind of have to be good at delegating too, don't you, to get other things done. Thanks. And another one I wanted to ask you was, like, what would you say is your most valuable mistake that you've made? Or maybe you have a few mistakes that you've made that you find value in.
I'd say that the mistakes that I made, which were terrible mistakes, and kind of, I'd say almost along the line of what Tom had mentioned, involve how I interacted with people early on, especially my first company for me. And there was this weird thing where, for me, starting a company, it felt accidental at first. And there was this sort of moments where I started managing people and probably not being very clear about expectations, but then would get frustrated when my mental, I was sort of like expecting people to be mind readers. And I would say that the mechanisms by which I would give feedback were probably not mature enough. And I have probably burned a bridge or two that way, because I probably didn't realize what it meant to be the CEO of a company in my head, because frankly, like, I sort of randomly did this and I didn't really know how I was being perceived by my coworkers. So I definitely made some mistakes along the lines of just really poor management. And I think studying that earlier would have been a healthier decision, and getting mentors and coaches behind me that could help me through understanding the right way to do this would have been better. And I think making mistakes, though, and getting feedback from people who were willing to give it to me was probably the most valuable thing that I could get as I continued to grow.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks so much for that.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I just want to point out that one of my colleagues messaged me saying, "Enough to be dangerous" is her new motto in life. So thank you for that. All right, now let's move on to talk to Dr. Sourima Biswas Shivhare. Sourima is a Health and Care Professionals Council registered clinical embryologist who is currently working at Simple Fertility, and she has also been ranked the rising star in embryology, deemed so by ARCS. Her academic career includes a bachelor's in human genetics at Newcastle University, followed by a master's in clinical embryology at the University of Oxford, a PhD in reproductive and vascular biology at the University of Newcastle, and a short postdoc at the Max Planck Institute of Biochemistry in Munich. Sourima, it's so great to have you on. I'm so excited to hear your story.
Thanks, Shaista. So I shall start my screen in a second. Are you able to see?
Yes.
Yeah, you can hear me as well, yeah?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay,
thank you.
Perfect. So hi, everyone, and thanks, Shaista and Anna, for hosting such an exciting session today. My name is Sourima, and I'm a clinical embryologist by profession, but really a reproductive biology student at heart. So I was born and brought up in India. And growing up, the two subjects that fascinated me were unsurprisingly biology, because it helped me make sense of myself, and also physics, because it helped me make sense of the world around me. Soon enough, I realized that I was perhaps a little bit more creative in biology, and I could think or ask beyond the books. And specifically, the question that drove me into embryology was, why sex? Now, you can only imagine the reaction on my mom's face when a 10 or 12-year-old me went up to her and asked her, well, I feel the need of learning what sex is, and specifically, why do we need to have sex? And so I dragged her to several bookstores before I got myself one of my first books, which was The Principles of Human Genetics by Robert Tameron. Sure enough, as I was flipping through the pages of this book, I had some of the answers. So learned a lot about X inactivation, the simply wonderful experiments by Thomas Hunt Morgan and Kelvin Bridges and Drosophila. But that only led to several hundred other questions. So by the time I was towards in secondary school, I had an agonizing wait of about another 4 or 5 years before I could learn genetics. And I took up a scholarship and studied human genetics at Newcastle University. Towards the end of my studies there, I realized that I wanted to learn the application or the genes and chromosomes in action in cells. So my focus shifted from lineage, from chromosomal segregation to actually lineage segregation. And so in other terms, cellular asymmetry. So with that in mind, I went on to read Masters in Clinical Embryology at Oxford, and I'm so grateful for Kevin and Celine there, the course directors, for giving me a chance, an opportunity to meet some of the most wonderful people in the world in this field, to nurture and encourage you further. And so I did my thesis actually in Cambridge, looking into cellular asymmetry with Professor Magdalena Zernicke-Götz, and together with my thesis supervisor at the time, Anya, we found that nuclear localization was one prerequisite for mouse preimplantation first lineage segregation. So anyway, towards the end of this project, Magda wanted me to stay back in her lab, continue in the same path, but I was driven by my next question. And this is a topic that Professor Gardner covered in your last session. So having learned a little bit about genes and embryos, the next question I had was, how does this semi-allogenic graft escape immune rejection? And so I went on from genes and chromosomes to cells and then on to the tissue, the endometrium. So with that in mind, I went back to Newcastle and looked at the human endometrium. A lot of histology slides, looking into the tissue itself. And as I was approaching the end of my studies there, I had a difficult decision to make, whether to go back into the clinic or to actually take a cheeky detour, because at the time CRISPR was all over the news. And so I did take a cheeky detour, and I went on to consolidate my learnings in genetics and embryology to apply them in mouse IVF with a little bit of CRISPR at the Max Planck Institute of Biochemie und Neurobiologie in München. So once I finished, or rather towards the end of the project there, I realized or felt that it was time that I moved into the clinic. I felt sort of equipped enough to move into the clinic and apply that knowledge. And so I came back to the UK and completed my Health and Care Professionals Council registration to work as a clinical embryologist. And so that kind of obviously is where I'm at right now. So I'm a clinical embryologist working at Simply Fertility. And I also try to, teach a little bit on the side in the course that I did quite a long time back now at Oxford. And also an exciting project came up with the Association of Reproductive and Clinical Scientists here in the UK, ARCS, formerly known as the Association of Clinical Embryologists, ACE, and in trying to develop an international certificate in embryology to try and share the knowledge that we have gained in the UK and the expertise we have in the UK with a wonderful team to share that with the rest of the world. And so I would just like to point out the 3 things that I believe really led me here. I think passion, as you can see, it's the questions that drove me to where I am today. So I would say follow your dreams, ask the questions, and carve your own path. persistence. Although this path looks very linear to you with these arrows, it wasn't. It was anything but. There was lots of ups and downs, and the only thing that kept me going was to believe that not to be defined by the failings, or rather be defined by how you build yourself back up from them. And finally, none of these would make any sense or give me any context other than the people. So this is, I had the very wonderful, luck of having three really strong women, or three generations of strong women in our family who redefined their roles in society. And so I hope you can seek inspiration from the people around you. And thank you.
Wow, thank you, Sourima. That was beautiful. I love that. I love that photo of your family in the end. All right, so I'm going to ask you the same questions that we've been circulating around. The first one being, what are some of the most valuable mistakes that you have made?
I think in terms of mistakes, I would say that there were a couple of times which were in the last sort of decade or so that I really had to pause and reflect, and but also they were difficult in terms of being a woman, not just in this field but in general, balancing career and family life, and also sort of trying to make yourself heard in amongst people. And so I think in those times of struggle, it sort of defined me, I would say. And the only thing I can say that I learned from it is that I realized the values that were the most closest to me, my moral values in life, and what I absolutely cannot give up, even if it was for career or any other goals.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think being a woman, being a career-driven woman means you balance a lot in your life. So that's awesome. And then the second question that you've already heard is, what is one thing you wish you'd known 5 years ago?
This is a bit of a tricky one, I think, but I just go ahead and say it. I think the embryology career in the UK is a pretty prescribed and rigorous one. And so I wished I had known that. Maybe I would have gone to another country and become an embryologist. But having said that, I do feel that, it's like, talking about an alternate universe. So I wouldn't change it, because of course, at the end of the day, I'm here today, and all of these experiences, this rigorous pathway that I've been through, has sort of made me who I am or where I am today. So I wouldn't change it, but
yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, you should have come to the States. It's not as prescribed over here, at least not yet. All right, thank you so much, Sourima.
Thanks so much, Sourima. I think I can definitely relate to the rigorous side of becoming an embryologist in the UK. But I am now delighted to be introducing Dr. Natalie Getreu, who is co-founder and COO of Fertility Health. Natalie was instrumental in establishing the first NHS-funded ovarian tissue cryopreservation service, which allows women facing cancer treatment to be able to preserve their fertility. Natalie holds a master's degree in reproductive science and women's health, and a PhD in fertility preservation from University College London, where her research focused on ovarian tissue freezing. So I'm very excited to introduce Natalie to everyone.
Hi, Anna. Thanks so much for having me on the panel today. When I was preparing, I tried to put my education and work experience down on a single slide, and it really wasn't too difficult. A degree, another degree, a PhD, lots of blood, sweat, and tears over there too. But the dot points on their own didn't seem that interesting, and probably weren't much different to some of your own career paths. So instead of talking about those points specifically, I want to talk about some of the stories behind those dot points and that link those dot points together, which sort of explain how I got to where I am today. So kind of like Alex, I enrolled in a science degree with every intention of transferring or doing a postgraduate degree in medicine. I wanted to become a doctor. But after spending a year in university in Melbourne, Australia, which is where I grew up, I decided it was time to go and explore the world. And the way to do that was to go on an exchange program. And I ended up at King's College in London. What was supposed to be a 6-month stint is now 10 years down the line. So I've been here quite a while. And during my time at King's, I took a developmental biology module that is probably responsible for getting me to where I am today. I was fascinated by the topic, and I went looking for some hands-on experience and ended up in a placement over the summer where for the first time, I think I saw science come to life. Instead of it being in a classroom or in a structured environment, I got to experience scientists working in the lab in a bench, and it sort of brought it all and made it much more real to me. Much of the work that was going on in that lab was in various embryonic species, and I became fascinated with watching these embryos grow and develop. I was less keen on dealing with them once they became animals, and so I decided that a career as an embryologist was probably something I wanted to pursue. So I enrolled in a Master's of Reproductive Science and Women's Health at UCL, which is where I met Anna, your lovely co-host today, with every intention of going down the same track as her, pursuing the scientist training program in embryology. But my summer research project set me on a new path. My project was supervised by Dr. Paul Hardiman, and it was essentially just to help his then PhD student gather some extra data. And so the work itself was quite boring, but the topic, ovarian tissue transplantation, is what I found and continue to find incredibly fascinating. And ovarian tissue transplantation is considered an experimental method of fertility preservation, used primarily in women facing fertility-threatening cancer treatment. Paul suggested I apply for a PhD, which he was happy to supervise, and I spent the next few years in a lab bringing science to life. I took a slight detour out of science for about 9 months, where I founded a company called Beg, Borrow, Buy, which was in fashion. So that's a story for another day, but I sort of was my first experience in entrepreneurship, and then went back to my real passion, which was science, and finished my PhD. And during that time, I was lucky enough to sort of travel around the world and learn from some of the leaders in the field of ovarian tissue transplantation and attend some great conferences. And at one of these conferences that I attended with Paul, he sort of had this light bulb moment and saw that other centers around the world were actually, clinically using ovarian tissue transplantation as opposed to just doing research on it. And he decided that if it was happening around the world, there's no reason the UK shouldn't be doing it as well. And so he embarked on establishing an NHS-funded ovarian tissue transplantation. And I was fortunate that he took me along for that ride. And in January 2019, the Royal Free Hospital launched its first NHS-funded ovarian tissue transplantation service. And whilst I was, throughout my graduate degree, it was quite common for friends or friends of friends and even strangers to ask me about things relating to their own fertility and reproductive health, given that I was in the field. And what struck me was just how difficult it was and how difficult it remains for the everyday woman to sort of get information and access to care about her own reproductive health and fertility. And it seemed that it wasn't just women with cancer who struggled with access to care, but all women. And it wasn't until about a month before my thesis was due, when I was actually bawling my eyes out in the toilets, that with facing an upcoming deadline of my thesis being due, that I met Dr. Helen O'Neill. And seeing me in the toilet, she ushered me into her office for a chat, and probably what she thought was, a couple of reassuring words. Little did we both know that that encounter was the start of Fertility Health. So Fertility's mission is to encourage all women to be proactive about their reproductive health. It's based on our fundamental belief that monitoring your reproductive health is sort of key to your overall well-being. And so we created a company which works by giving women an at-home fertility test and helps provide them with information not just about their fertility, but about their reproductive health in general. And we hope that this will empower women to make informed decisions when it matters and not when it's too late. Kind of sort of what Sourima touched on, the work-life balance as a woman and a mother is sometimes complicated. And as women, we do have a lot more opportunities than we've ever had before. But unfortunately, Mother Nature's clock, well, it keeps on ticking. And so we started Fertility to sort of try and help women at least be informed about this ticking time clock. And so what started as a crying mess of an idea in my co-founder's office has grown into a company, a team of 10, a service that's live across the UK with plans to go international sometime in the future. So although when I reflect on my short career to date, I feel lucky to have had mentors, people who have supported me, pushed me, and guided me, and some who have even gone into business with me.
Oh, that's lovely, Natalie. It's so nice to hear that story. Really, really nice. Thank you for that. And I just wanted to, again, ask you if there was any valuable mistakes that you have made that you think maybe kind of helped you along the way, or, you think are valuable now.
I think definitely trying my hand at a fashion company. That was a valuable mistake. I think on the one hand, stick to what you know, but on the other hand, I sort of learned a lot of the skills which I've been able to now take and use in fertility and in growing fertility.
Yeah, maybe just keep the fashion for your
fashion for the weekends and science for during the week.
Oh, very good. And was there anything that you wish you had known 5 years ago that you know now?
I think that in the startup world, and I'm sure some of the other founders in the on the panel can relate, sort of everything needs to be done yesterday, and sort of getting it out there is considered better than getting something done right or perfectly. And actually that sometimes taking a step back and doing it your own way and maybe doing it right is actually the best thing, so you don't end up redoing things 20 times over.
Yeah.
And I wish that someone had told me that at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm sure it's probably would have helped you a lot, but I'm sure you're learning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. I think that's a very important lesson, especially for the embryologists in the industry. We tend to be perfectionists. So knowing that everything doesn't necessarily have to be perfect before it's put out there is really reassuring to hear. Plus, I really loved your story about the bathroom breakdown. I think that's one that resonates with a lot of us in academia as we approach deadlines, for sure. So thank you for that. All right, so now let us move on to our last but by no means least speaker, Dr. Sheela Sadruddin. I'd first like to address the elephant in the room. I'm sure a lot of you might be wondering, but me and Sheela are actually not related, and we've only very recently met, and what an honor it's been, Sheela. So Sheela completed her master's degree in clinical embryology and andrology at EVMS in 2013, and her PhD in developmental biology from the University of Texas in 2018. She is a certified high complexity lab director in IVF laboratories in California and Texas. She served as a CAP inspector, a clinical consultant, a panelist for NASA, which you might remember her from one of our previous I3 sessions, as well as an expert reviewer for the United Nations. Sheela, we would love to hear about your journey and your experiences.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Shaista, and thank you, I3, for having me. We had a wonderful session today with amazing stories, and I agree with Natalie that, certainly we have, instead of going down the list with all of my bullet points with the list of degrees, I would like to share my stories. And certainly, coming up to this level where we're directing laboratories at such being women and being young certainly comes with a host of experiences and a host of uh, complications and just setbacks in our pathway. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about my journey and my experiences. So I'm the first generation of in the United States. My parents are from Pakistan, and so I grew up in Chicago. And that alone was rough because, of course, as children are growing now, their parents are guiding them through school and they are telling them the next steps and planning for the future, planning for savings for their college, etc. I didn't have any of that. So certainly I learned the hard way that I'm going to have to build this path myself. Certainly struggled my whole career as far as college, worked a couple of jobs just to have enough to save for the next tuition, and then finally graduated with a bachelor's degree in forensic biology. Believe it or not, I wanted to be a medical examiner because I thought, well, I'll just be in a morgue because dead bodies don't complain. And so that'll be easy. And I'll still have my love for science and working with, under the microscope. I've always been a scientist in that I love solving puzzles. So that to me at the time seemed like the perfect job. It was a puzzle, a body, and we needed to figure out what's going on and, just form a final opinion on paper. Well, back in the day during my undergraduate days in Arlington, Texas, actually, I met one of my mentor was um, my major professor. And so she was kind enough to give me an internship. And during that internship, we studied rape scenes of young women and the semen that's left behind as evidence on those rape scenes. So we would take samples of the semen and we would run PCR. So this was back over a decade ago, 15 years ago. And so we would look at the PCR amplification products and then run them through the forensic database in hopes of hits from previous crimes. And so we got a publication out of that. Me and a good friend of mine, actually, back in the day, her name is Kinga Wielander, and now she's part of my embryology team. So we go way back, and I'm just glad to have her. So we had a publication from that, and one semester before I graduated, I decided, well, let me start looking for a job because certainly, after I graduate, it'll certainly be difficult. So simultaneously, I was looking for an open position and stumbled upon this ad that says embryology, and I thought, that sounds interesting. I have no idea what it is. Let me just apply and see how it goes. And at the time, it was at Texas Health Resources, Dr. Diane Hammett, I believe she's somewhere in Arizona at this point, um, was uh, was kind enough to offer me an interview, and so I must have not impressed her because I was certainly not selected. But certainly the lack of experience as an embryologist was key, and so the job was offered to someone else. I went on to um, bombard her emails that, hey, I am really interested. If you would just give me a second look or a second thought, I'm sure I can prove an asset to your company. Eventually, I was hired on as PRN. So I want to state what my first struggle was. So I was young at the time, a new graduate. I was ambitious, I had the passion, I was driven, but I had no experience. I had no true, this was my first career related job, so to speak. And I had a lot to learn. I was hired on as a PRN. Dr. At the director at the time was kind enough to go ahead and give me this opportunity. And I found myself working 40 hours a week. And because the need just arose, as with all PRN options, it's constantly changing. Excuse me. So um, at the time, I was struggling because I saw that I was working full time. However, I didn't have the benefits to accompany the full-time position. So, that was my first mistake, is to create this sort of tension in the environment rather than just being grateful that, hey, I was gaining experience from this opportunity. So sometimes our struggles are because we seek the wrong things. We want something too much earlier than the time allows for. So sometimes just taking a step back, and like Natalie had just mentioned, and just um, being thankful for what you have and just finding solace in it is very important. So, to all of the members in our audience that are new to the field, regardless of age and regardless of gender, I think it's very important to, just take a step back and just take it all in and learn from it the best you can. So of course from there, because I had it in my mind that I wanted this full-time position, I went ahead and looked for something that was available at the time. And so I wanted it so bad that I went ahead and took an offer for a full-time position at Fort Worth Fertility. So I don't know how many members in the audience are aware of the center in Texas, but at the time I was a team of two. So back then IVF was very different in that much simpler IVF, day 3 transfers, day 5 transfers, very little or PGT, if any. And so I would run the andrology and then come into embryology. Now, I ran into, of course, my second hurdle here because now I had the full time job that I wanted. However, I was working over 40 hours a week. I was working close to 60 hours a week. And of course, as a woman and as a young professional, I was juggling family life with work and trying to build my career. So there's always going to be a trade-off, and I learned quickly that was it for me. So, I gained the experience that I could. I went on from there. I decided that I just couldn't work 12-hour days. It was just a struggle. So, that took me to Virginia, actually, where I met my good friend Jessica Rebert, and she's in the audience here today. So, hello, Jessica. And we went through the EVMS program together in 2011 and graduated in 2013, which was a fabulous decision on my part. That opened up several doors for me. I certainly went on to gain my TS from the AAB, and was eventually landed a supervisory position here at Dallas IVF in Texas, where it's home for me. And after that, I decided, because, why not, that let's just go ahead and enroll in a PhD program, although I never saw myself doing that at the beginning of my career. The PhD program I learned so much from, in that when I went into the program, I thought, I know everything. I know so much. I just need this degree just to validate it, and I'll go on to bigger opportunities. Well, the program was very rigorous, and I applaud my major professor, Dr. Warren Berggren, who showed me what I don't know, because that was one of the most important lessons that I've learned. Um, there is so much out there that you don't know, and there's so much more to learn, and so much more to learn from younger and newer individuals, and senior and older individuals, all in the same. Everyone can teach you something, and that's one of the key lessons that I learned also throughout my career. And I've been serving as a director here at Dallas IVF, and in addition to that, I've done other roles. As Shasta mentioned, that I was a research proposal review analyst for NASA, and NASA has a space biology program, and proposals are submitted. And there is a host of things to learn. There's a whole world of science out there, and if your mind is as stimulated as mine, where any new information serves as fuel, and then that was certainly the way to go for me. I've hosted an array of opportunities where I've served as a reviewer, for example, for United Nations in their program for space aviation, especially now with the COVID, in the COVID era. I reviewed proposals for COVID testing platforms, so I've learned a lot there as well. Of course, I can go on and on, but my main points here is that our struggles are our own. There's so much to learn from our stories, and if it's not hard, it's not worth it. And everything that you grow from certainly improves you overall as a person, and hopefully makes you more humble and gains humility. So thank you for this opportunity to help me share my story.
Thank you so much, Sheela. I think those are very inspirational words to live by. So you went over some of the mistakes that you made through your career trajectory, but do you have any other valuable mistakes you'd like to share?
Certainly, there's several mistakes that everyone makes, but one of my big ones was learning what the words chain of command mean. And so, being young and being inexperienced, it's very easy to come into a field where you're working with individuals that are more experienced than you. That can be certainly very intimidating. And so, like attracts like. So, you tend to, group with individuals that know as much as you, and you can relate to. And that's wrong. I would advise that individuals that are coming into this career, you should always surround yourself with individuals that know more than you, and respect the chain of command and follow the chain of command, and trust that your leadership and your management have the best interests your best interests at heart. So open communication, and making sure that you have very clear expectations and very clear communication with your management will serve tremendously for your overall career growth, excuse me, where I didn't, I wasn't able to do that, again, given inexperience and young age. And it was something that certainly was a harsh lesson to learn in the long term.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sheela. And my second question to you, which I'm sure you're prepared for, is what is one thing you'd wish you'd known 5 years ago?
One of the things, well, the most important thing that I've learned is that success is different for everybody. And measuring my success with someone else's success is just is going to be a recipe for failure. So one of the things that I've always done is that, oh, she's a supervisor, I want to become a supervisor. And so then I've learned that, just that was just one example. But once I hit that milestone, then, I find myself questioning, well, I'm not happy. This is not what, this is not it for me. This, I want more, or I want something different. So building your own path and defining success in your own terms is very important. And just looking into yourself and just making sure that you are aware of what makes you happy and what defines you and what will serve as truly what's accomplished, and happiness in your life will then make your overall career mean more and become more successful in your own eyes.
That's great. And I think it's good for your own mental health too, because it does lead to a level of toxicity when you have this over ambition and you start comparing yourselves to others too much. I think that's a great point, Sheela. All right, Anna, you want to move on to the discussion part of the Q&A?
Yeah, thanks so much, Sheela. It was really interesting, and I'm sure everyone else found it as interesting as I did. So we've had lots of questions coming in from our audience, and I just wanted to kind of invite all our panelists back again just to answer some questions for us, and hopefully we can have a bit of a discussion regarding some of the stuff that was asked. So the first question I'm going to kind of maybe put out towards Tom and Alex, if you guys want to both have a go at it. Basically, what is the best advice you would give to someone graduating now, or what skill set would you kind of tell graduates to kind of focus on the most, that you think is most beneficial to kind of getting people where they would want to go?
I can start.
Okay.
So I mean, I think there's a personality on YouTube named Casey Neistat. And some individuals might know him and some might not, but he made an amazing point that's always stuck with me. And he said, the best way to discover what it is that you want to do is by doing a job that you absolutely hate doing. Because if you put yourself in that situation where you're ultimately day in, day out doing something that you hate, it causes the mind to go to a place to discover what it is that you want to focus on. So I would suggest to anybody who's kind of starting their career, doing something early, definitely if they don't know exactly what they're passionate about, to maybe even do something that is completely out of their orbit and something that they ultimately have no interest in, to discover that other side. And it's a little counterintuitive, but it spoke to me when I heard it. Yeah. On a practical level, I would say computer science. I think the world is heading in a direction where sciences and arts, are beginning to learn how to play more naturally together. When you think about the kind of tech wave that we're now starting to experience, specifically around AI and machine learning, what it helps to do is, when applied appropriately, it removes a lot of barriers and actually leads to spaces where creativity can flourish best. So I'd say something in the kind of arts and sciences territory, and probably most practically computer science.
Great.
I'll echo, definitely computer science feels like it's helpful in most areas of science and arts, and has applications that are incredibly broad and helpful for many career choices. One direction I'll go with this question, having graduated in 2009 from college, we had just gone through the subprime meltdown and the real estate meltdown. So a lot of my classmates and I all had sort of fewer job prospects than the classes before us. And we sort of saw a number of different patterns, people going to graduate school more, people honestly just being thankful to have jobs if we had them. I was in sort of the category of people that it was like April of 2009 and I did not really have what we'd call a job. So I was like, all right, I'll study for the MCATs and I'll see if I could get a job. And I would reach out to professors and ended up getting introduced again to the group of folks in the fertility field that I ended up working with. But, you know, one sort of attitude that I had, and I was very lucky to have this introduction, was because this was something I was interested in this, right? Like I cared about going down the rabbit hole of genetics. And I think specializing, if you know that you're interested in something, is really valuable. But the corollary to that is I didn't need a full-time job. I didn't need a W-2. I said, all right, I'll work hourly. I'll look for internships. I sort of did anything to make myself valuable. And again, obviously had to support myself. And I was very lucky also that I could move back with my parents for a few months while I was figuring a lot of things out. So I had that safety net. But if you have the capacity to sort of just find opportunities and meet people and really explore, I think that, for me, I wasn't really above taking jobs that, were sort of atypical at the time for someone graduating college. And I think that it did allow me to state space explore a little bit and get exposure to many different things for my first couple of years out of college. And that was valuable in its own way for seeing what I liked, what I didn't like, and mostly meeting people and establishing a network, whether or not it was always in the direction of genetics.
Good, yeah. Both really interesting answers. And I think, yeah, meeting people is a massive part of, any job or career. It's getting yourself out there and getting connected with people and kind of working out, their experiences and, kind of like what we're doing today and what works and what doesn't work and seeing if that's going to kind of fit you or not. Thank you.
Yeah, I think networking is definitely an underutilized component in any industry or any field. Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a question. Since we have a nice diverse panel, some who are clinical embryologists and some who are in the more entrepreneurial startup space, I want all of your feedback as to what do you see as the biggest disruptors to the industry in the next 5 to 10 years? Anyone is welcome to start.
I certainly think it's tailoring and personalization. I think there's no longer a one-size-fits-all approach to medicine or embryology, and we sort of need to look towards precision medicine in our reproduction.
Great. I agree with that. Anybody else?
I think one of the key aspects of where the future is headed and how we need to adjust to it is that things are constantly going to be changing. There's a new normal that's setting in. We don't know what it is. We're finding out ourselves through trial and error, and we're counting on the guidance of, all of some of the senior members of the industry to help us in this transition period because they've probably already gone through it themselves. And so one big thing to certainly have is the ability to be able to transition to the new normal and to be open to new ideas and work towards a better future. And so I think we all as scientists need to be able to have an open mind and be able to transition forward.
Very true.
So true.
Completely agree with Sheela on that. Just wanted to add, in terms of disruptors, I think automation, as we already know, in embryology, be it AI or just multi-omics, so chip on chips, basically. So I think that'll be something to look forward to in the next decade.
Anna, you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, I've got another question, and it's actually for you, Sheela. And it's from one of our audience members, Kimberly Kainsat. And it's quite interesting. So she has said that, you've got a really impressive CV and you've been in the kind of industry a while, but, you're still very young. And her question was, do you have any major differences and, do you still consider yourself as young as you were when you started? Or do you think there's any major differences that have changed since when you first began until now, although it hasn't been that long? Is there anything, that you kind of think that has changed a lot?
Oh, absolutely. There is so much change in the industry. Back when I first started, I found myself begging my supervisors that please give me 10 minutes on the microscope. Please let me try this ICSI. Please save these needles for me. And now, with the new um, generation of embryologists that are coming in, I find myself begging on the other side, please come sit here, please. 10 minutes on the microscope. So it's certainly very different, and that work ethic is different. The
Mm.
work-life balance for people has changed, and back then, everyone had the same ethic that I had. You work hard, and you build your career, and eventually everything will be where everything will turn out perfectly. Whereas now, people are noticing that, especially COVID has helped us notice that there is a um, there's certainly a balance in things, and work is not everything. Of course, you need to balance it with your life at home. And as far as specifically in the industry, the changes that are in the industry, yes, of course. As I mentioned in my talk, that IVF was very simple. We did day 3 transfers. There was hardly any PGS. Now things are so different in that we have combination cycles. We have fresh retrievals combined with frozen thaws. And so the workload of an embryologist is so different now than it was even a decade ago. And so the rigor and the intensity that the job demands is so much higher today as the new embryologists are coming in and the fresh graduates are coming in looking to build a career in embryology than it was when I was building it. Certainly, there are struggles today, and there were struggles back in the day as well, but those struggles are different. And the time of training for an embryologist, coming fresh out of school, on the job training to where that embryologist is proficient and independent, are upwards of 2-3 years. And some individuals don't necessarily last under that pressure. There's certainly a breaking point, and everyone's breaking point is different. But if you have good a support system and a structure at work, and somewhat like a safety net, then certainly it's worth it. The career is worth it. The effort that you put into it is worth it. So, to answer your question in short, yes, tremendous changes even over the last decade.
Yeah, I completely agree. And as you say, it hasn't even been that long, when you first probably flown by for you. But, the amount that has changed in terms of like an embryologist's actual role now and everything, it's changing kind of yearly, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions that we didn't get through, unfortunately, but I hope that we can address them individually in our upcoming networking session. But I would like to end off with one last question asked by Kimberly Keenast. I hope I pronounced that last name right. Kimberly is actually the winner of our best question asked for tonight. So the question is, do you see any major differences between your first years in this field and someone entering this field at this time?
I'm sorry, Shasta, can you repeat the first part of that question? Major differences between
Your first years in the field and someone who's just starting off or entering the field at this time. So you covered that a little bit, a lot, Sheela, in what you mentioned, but I wanted to open that up for anybody else in terms of clinical embryology, Sourima, or entrepreneurship. Does anybody else have any insight into that question?
Yeah, sure. In terms of embryology, I think in the UK, the path has become, it's much more closed now. So unfortunately, it is the harsh reality, and it is pretty prescribed, and you need to get into a clinic to actually be able to get on to one of these routes to the registration process. But yeah, I think it kind of boils down to networking at the end of it.
Great. So once again, congratulations to Kimberly. We will be in touch with you shortly to send you our Smart Separations Geno Air Sanitizer. And Sourima, on that note of networking, just a reminder to please stay tuned for a networking event. We will be moving over into that room shortly. But before we do, here's a reminder that we will be holding our 40th session next Tuesday, November 10th at the same time and same space. This session is entitled Clinical Management of Fertility Preservation, Clinical and Technical Aspects. This is hosted by the Italian Society of Fertility and Sterility.
Thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope that you all found it very interesting. So as Shaista mentioned, we will now be posting the link for the networking meeting in the chat box. So anyone that would like to join us, please use that link to join the after party. And here you will have an opportunity to meet and mingle with some of IVF's best and brightest and make new connections in the field. Since we're all a bit deprived of networking opportunities because the conferences that would have provided us with these traditionally are not going on at the minute, we hope this fills the void. We would also like to thank every member of our audience for joining us this afternoon or evening, depending where in the world you are. And we thank you for your continued support with the initiative. We hope that the networking program will allow us to engage with you all better afterwards. So we'll see some of you in the new room and the rest of you guys hopefully next week. Thank you.
See you soon. Goodbye.